So this movie was alright, but let's be honest, it didn't make a whole lot of sense now, did it? Oh, and spoilers. So this movie starring Charlize Theron comes out on Netflix, and it's an action sci-fi fantasy that's based on a graphic novel about these almost immortal warriors that travel the world and solve crime. So far so good. And yeah, overall it was a pretty enjoyable affair, but there were a few things left unanswered, so let's talk about this. But first things first, I've not read the graphic novel, I'm not going to reference the graphic novel. As far as I'm concerned, I shouldn't have to go buy a bunch of books just to understand what is effectively a glorified straight-to-video movie. That said, I did look at the first few pages that Amazon let you read for free, and all I'm gonna say is, if they make a sequel and it turns out Andy is a lesbian, wouldn't be surprising. Anyway, the first mystery I want to try and clear up is, why does Andy take Niall's phone? Now you might be thinking, well, obviously it's so she doesn't try to contact her family, and that may be a little part of it, but I think the real truth is, it's because she's a bitch. Here's the thing, in the beginning of the movie, Andy gets caught in the background of someone's selfie and then asks if she can take their photo, just so she can delete the picture with her in the back as a way of covering her tracks. No evidence of her being there, right? Here's what's wrong with this. What would have happened if the lady said no? And look, I think it's safe to assume that wasn't the first time Andy got caught in the background of a selfie, so is she walking up to all of them like, here, let me take a picture for you? Because somebody's gonna say no, and then what happens? You gonna beat them up and steal their phone? Furthermore, what did Andy do in the days when everyone had film cameras? Was she just taking cameras off people and ripping the film roll out the back and then running off? Because if she was, she's a bitch. But clearly Andy isn't as thorough at covering her tracks as she thinks she is, because it only took 2 years for Copley to gather centuries worth of information on Andy, and she didn't even notice he was doing it. Now you might be thinking, but Budget Tim Roth was in cahoots with Copley, so he could have been helping gather all that information. And if that's true, that would mean Andy was hanging around a traitor for 2 years and didn't notice that. Nah, it's not because she's being cautious, it's because she's a bitch. Next mystery to clear up. Why is Quinn so crazy? Now, they talk about an immortal who got locked in an iron coffin and thrown in the sea. They spent decades looking but couldn't find her, so she's been dying over and over again in that box for over 500 years, and that would make anyone go insane. Seems like a pretty reasonable explanation, right? But I don't think that's the reason she's mad. Or at least, I don't think that's the only reason she's mad. They said they spent decades looking for her, or anyone that can tell them where she is. Now we know that when they die, all immortals have a quick Zoom meeting with bad connection, because from that, Andy knew that Niall was a Marine in Afghanistan. And by the way, real quick, they called this character Niall Freeman. Gee, I wonder why. Anyway, Andy was able to find Niall after one death, yet she can't find Quinn? Now, to be fair, they do say the Zoom dreams stop when they meet IRL, and since Andy already met Quinn, she wouldn't have dreamt of her. But Nicholas, Joseph and Budget Tim Roth have never met Quinn. So that means 3 of them have had that image in their heads all that time, along with Andy's guilt for losing a soldier, and yet they still couldn't find Quinn? Now maybe Niall was easier to find because Niall knew where she was, whereas Quinn had no idea where they threw her. Maybe whatever they know at time of death gets transferred during their shared Inception dream state. But if that were true, how come Andy didn't know Niall's name? Now consider this. Andy was able to sneak into a military base, knock out 3 Marines, kidnap 1 and escape undetected. Andy clearly has a very particular set of skills. Skills that she has acquired over a very long career. Skills that make her a nightmare for... You get the point. She knows what she's doing. Also consider this. Somehow Quinn manages to escape the box, figure out how to get her hair and makeup done, be fashionable, find Budget Tim Roth, and figure out that his name is actually Booker, all in about 6 months. Now that lets me know that Andy and the 3 amigos weren't really looking for Quinn. Maybe they checked under the table, looked in the closet, maybe even asked one of the neighbors and then gave up. Quinn is pissed because she realized that her best friend forever, someone who she literally gave her life for, just saw her as an entanglement. Quinn is mad because she realized that she wasn't that important to Andy after all. Quinn is furious because now when she thinks of Andy, she realizes she's a bitch. By the way, did you notice they said that this guy was the only immortal to die, making him the first immortal to die in this movie? he was the first to go. I swear these movies are getting bare creative with this, innit? Alright, now one last mystery. Why is Andy such a bitch? There's a scene where Niall is praying and Andy mocks her saying there is no God. Now you gotta think, Andy's been there before. Someone just figuring out they're immortal, they're scared, they've got a million thoughts running through their mind. So she's gotta know that's really not the time to be mocking someone's religious beliefs. But she's a bitch. Now Andy decided to use her superpowers to fight crime because she wanted to bring some good to the world, but every time she saw the news, there was some atrocity going on somewhere and she began to feel like it's not even worth it since things are just getting worse. This is a woman who tries to bring positivity to the world, was hated for being different. At one time she was praised highly, but now a lot of people, maybe even most people, don't even know who she is or treat her like a myth. She has a small group of loyal followers. She was betrayed by one of her followers. She's been executed, then resurrected, and believes she'll die when it's her time. Andy isn't a woman who doesn't believe in God. Andy is a woman having a crisis of faith. Over time, she's allowed her perception of the world to be shaped by what she saw in TV. So with everything she's done, she didn't realize the impact it had until it was pointed out to her. Or you could say, she needed her faith reaffirmed. Because until that moment, throughout the whole movie, she's a bitch. So I do think this movie, at least in parts, is trying to make a commentary on how we consume information, especially considering how too much negative images can distort our perception of the broader reality, but also living in a self-created bubble can give a sense of entitlement, so perhaps trying to find a balance is key, but should also be careful not to become so consumed with grief that you turn to the dark side. Now, before I get into my final thoughts, real quick, if you liked this movie, check out these movies. They're all action movies about people who can't be killed, so if you haven't seen them already, you might want to do that. So here's the biggest thing I got from this movie. None of it really needed to happen. Or more specifically, a lot of it could have been avoided had people just asked. Copley double-crossed them because he wanted to get proof of their existence to give to Merrick so that Merrick could find their secret. But Copley ultimately was really on their side. This guy was collecting stories, details, all kinds of information. He was like a Logan Paul fan. Like the only thing he didn't do was dab on the haters. Plus he already had a working relationship with Budget Tim Roth who also wanted them to find out why they lived so long. So why didn't he just ask? They don't have to go for all that setup pretending they're saving some girls and really killing some special forces people, because those guys are dead, like for real dead. They don't get to come back. There's a whole bunch of people now who are missing their husbands, boyfriends maybe, friends, uncles, whoever they may be, when Copley could have just asked Budget Tim Roth to come see Merrick. And maybe from there they could have found out that Merrick is an arrogant arsehole and then just go to one of his competitors, because apparently other people are also looking for the secrets of the and Andy could have just asked Niall to come with her instead of knocking her out. She was able to sneak into a military base, knock out 2 Marines, disarm a third. She could have said, hey, I know you got your neck sliced, I know you died, and I know why you're alive. Come with me and I'll explain. How hard is that? Instead, she's giving out her long-ass name, Anaconda de Sliverin. Bitch, don't nobody got time for that. And by the way, Niall said that Copley's gonna make it look like she was killed in action, which, all things considered, probably the best idea. But I really think they should let Niall contact her family, because we have an official story from the military that so many people, including her close friends, know is empirically false, especially when it concerns somebody called Niall Freeman. You might just be starting something you don't want to be starting, you know what I mean? And lastly, and perhaps the only unexplainable mystery, at the end of the movie, Andy, Joseph and Nicholas decide to part ways with Budget Tim Roth because of his betrayal. Yes, they decide to team up with Copley, who already betrayed them. They let one guy go, someone who they've known for years because of one screw up, and replace him with the guy they just met, who was introduced to them by the guy they just let go. That don't make no kind of sense. Or actually, maybe it does. I think the reason is because she's a bitch. And that is what I think of the old guard. What do you think? Atomic blonde or atomic bomb? Let me know down below, and while you're there, be sure to like, subscribe, and drop a suggestion if you don't mind.